Next one is an update on the municipal separate storm sewer system permit, Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load action plan, and stormwater utility fee. Ms. Beauregard.
Thank you. I'll do a quick introduction and then I'll introduce the folks that are actually going to go through this item tonight. So if you recall, over the past year, this is the third time we've been to City Council regarding the stormwater system and the fee. We first came to you in September of 22 and then earlier this year in February. And at those work sessions, we gave you a status of the MS4 TMDL programs. Following the work session in February, one of the next steps identified was to perform a study on the city's stormwater fee enterprise and bring that back to council for discussion. That is what we're here this evening to do. That work has been completed by Wiley Wilson, and I'll introduce Pete Kessaker, who will kick us off, and then introduce Keith Thompson of Wiley Wilson, who will actually present the information this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for giving us the opportunity to make this presentation.
Welcome.
Leslie pretty well covered the background of why we're here. And so as such, we commissioned Wiley Wilson to perform the study of our stormwater utility fee. Keith Thompson is here. He's with Wiley Wilson out of their Lynchburg office. And Keith has been integral in our program since 2013 when they were first implemented. His background specializing in MS4 program administration, TMDL implementation, stormwater permitting, stormwater BMP design, and creation and implementation of stormwater utility fee enterprise funds, which is key because that's why we're here this evening. So with that, I'll introduce Keith.
Thank you, Pete, and thank you, Council, for once again having me here to talk about stormwater. I know it's always everybody's favorite topic.
Thank you.
Today, I'm going to talk about a few items. First, we'll do a quick recap of the MS4 program just to remind everybody why we're here. We're going to talk a little bit about your existing fee structure. We'll look at the funding needs so you kind of understand what the backdrop is that we're trying to accomplish. And we'll look at adjustment options in order to pay for your stormwater needs with your stormwater fee. And then we'll go through some recommendations. Yep. So the why. Back in 2013, the city of Staunton, along with its neighbors, were deemed an MS4 community. Being an MS4 community means you have a large enough population density and that your system is complicated enough that you have to have an actual permit through the state of Virginia. It's actually a federal permit, but DEQ administers it, that dictates how you have to manage that program. And that comes with a lot of different elements that you have to do on an annual basis. And it's a program permit that has to be renewed every 5 years. And that started in 13, and we just went through a permit renewal recently. Some of the elements that are included in that range from educating the public on stormwater and usage, involving the actual public in it. So there's administrative actions there. Looking at your stormwater system and look for any illicit discharges, managing construction sites and their runoff, erosion, and things like that. Post-construction runoff control, which means evaluating plans that are submitted for best management practices, making sure that actual best management practices are in place or active and working, and then good housekeeping, basically different ways that you have to administer your program. One of the largest factors that came into that permit is Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load. That is effectively a national program that anybody that drains to the Chesapeake Bay, they evaluate what the total runoff of nutrients are, specifically looking at nitrogen and phosphorus, how much is coming off of each of the river sheds, and then how much should be coming off that to keep the Chesapeake Bay as a pristine water. Right now, it's an impaired water. And so the delta between what you can do and what you are doing based on that analysis that the federal government did is how much you have to reduce it by in its entirety by 2028. So we're in our last permit cycle, and by 2028, we have to administer 100% of those nutrient reductions for phosphorus and nitrogen. And so that's what has precipitated much of this study. So our study had a couple goals. First, we wanted to look at your existing structure and look at it in two ways. One, to make sure it's equitable. Equitable meaning the people that impact stormwater the most are paying the most. And then the other thing we wanted to look at is your crediting approach and to make sure that it's justifiable and it's providing the right amount of revenue, but also giving people the opportunity to reduce their fees. Next, we wanted to look at the ability to fund the future costs that you have associated with your stormwater program. And finally, we wanted to look at modification options to make sure that you're paying for your stormwater needs out of your stormwater fund as opposed to having to supplement that with the general fund. So to go over your current structure, just to remind everybody, you have an 18-tier system. So however much impervious area you have at your residence or the property that you own will put you in one of these tiers. Now, impervious includes your roof, sidewalk, any pavements, anything that water can't infiltrate and runs off. And so the baseline rate is in tier 1, and that's $3.20 per month. And that covers anybody from 0 impervious area up to 3,400 square feet. All the other tiers are built off of that. Your credit program, you do offer credits. You offer credits for if you put a management practice in that handles quality and a management practice that handles quantity. You have no annual verification for those BMPs. So once you get a credit, that's in perpetuity, and there's no maximum value for how much that can reduce within your fee. So the first thing we want to always look at is equitability. And what we did, we took a look at everybody's properties and we looked at it on a basis of single-family residential homes or non-single-family residential homes. Non-single family residential would include the high density residential. It would also include commercial, industrial, anything that's not a single family residence. You'll see in the gold color that 39% of your impervious area is residential, single family. Everything else falls into the non-single family residential, and it's about 61% of your impervious area. So more runoff comes off of those areas.
So I do one thing, if you could go a couple slides back,
Sure.
one more. Now, that's impervious area, that's measured in square feet.
Correct.
Right there, right? Okay, and I'd like to point out an acre is 43,560 square feet. And so most houses downtown are going to be a third of an acre, something like that, maybe less. So, you know, just to give everyone an idea of how much we're paying, because I mean, that scale goes up pretty high, and that would hit a very small portion of commercial landowners. So
Correct. The
sorry, just,
highest tier is going to be something like a large corporate center with
Thing,
lots,
yeah.
box store with lots of pavement for parking and that kind of thing.
yeah, most of us are in the less than $20 range
Correct.
per month. So, sorry, point of order.
Thank you.
And so going back to our structure and look at equitability, we compared that to where the fee is being generated from. And as you can see by our charts here, our fee generation very closely matches the impervious area, which is the target that we look at. That suggests that you have your 18-tier system is a very equitable program. This evaluation doesn't take into account credit. This is just your baseline charges that we looked at in terms of equitability. So we did want to look at that crediting impact, and just to make sure everybody's on the same page, when you put in a management practice on site that addresses quality, you're able to reduce what tier you fall in by 3 total tiers. If you have one that manages quantity, that's another 3 tiers. And so for a quick example, if you had a tier in the worst case scenario in tier 18, and you had a BMP on that property, best management practice, and it handled both quantity and quality, which that is the state standard for a new structure that is designed, you would get a 6-tier credit reduction. In this example, that shows that you would have a reduction of over 90% of the fee for that particular property. Now let's compare that to what most of the ones in the state do. Most localities in the state limit that to 40 to 50% total reduction between the 2 categories. The reason for that is that a lot of your cost is relative to administration. It's relative to monitoring your infrastructure. It's relative to your staff and your programs to facilitate the program. Think of this in terms of a water availability fee that you might see on a water bill. You can reduce your gallons used, but you can't reduce the fact that it's available to you because there's a certain cost with that. The other thing that most localities do is they require an annual renewal of that credit, because a lot of these BMPs can either be taken out of service or they can be ignored and they can come in disrepair and they're no longer doing what they're supposed to, or they may have never been put into it and installed in state standards to start with. And so most require an annual renewal with an annual third-party inspection of that to validate that it is both there and it is operating the way it's intended to before you can get that credit. And so that's just a little comparison to what others are doing. And the overall impact to you as a community, one, it's reducing your overall revenue available for fees. Over $250,000 a year are credited to your program. That's 25% of your overall generation. A lot of that is in reduction, is in how you approve that. Those other measures that the other localities are doing, like capping it at 40 to 50% and having those annual renewals, also reduces the amount of credits they typically see to about 5% of their fee. And so there's a lot larger amount of your revenue that's lost every year, possibly to BMPs that either don't exist or inoperable at this point. The other thing it does, it shifts equitability. Most commercial properties since 2000 have all had to have BMPs put in as part of the process. So they're more likely to have those management practices in place. They're also more likely to have more of impact on it with higher percentages of their lots impervious. And so that those credits are shifting some of the responsibility of the fee more to your single family residential side and away from the commercial side. So with that, I want to shift a little bit to looking at our funding needs. So we looked at the funding needs in three categories. First category being program administration. That includes your staff, equipment, and depreciation fees. We also look at the flooding issues that you have in town. And so we allotted about $100,000 per year to address that. Not quite what you need right now, but that gives you a steady income to address some of the emergency needs that happen. And I should say on the program administration side, we did escalate that 3% annually. That's to adjust for extra needs, growing program, and just to increase cost. The largest cost that you're going to see over the next 5 years is actually related to the total maximum daily load program. And to break that down a little bit, the total cost of that program is estimated to be around $11.6 million from between now and 2028. There's some projects there that have been identified, including an Asylum Creek restoration project, 3 Green Hills Ponds projects that are retrofits. So that's $2.5 million for 3 different projects. The Staunton High School BMP project that we looked at several years ago is included. And then the largest portion of that is a number of smaller projects that fit into the public-private BMP restoration. So this is looking for opportunities for some of these ponds that are not working correctly to go in and update them and make sure they are working correctly, but take credit for that extra nutrient reduction that we're getting. And so that's what we've shown for the next 5-year cycle. And you can see if you look at your revenue versus those expenses, there's a big gap. Particularly in the years where we're heavily putting in all those projects. But you can even see in 2024 and 2030, when those projects are not being done, you're already at a deficit in your program. So then we start looking at how do we make this program work with this fee? And one of the first option we looked at is, okay, what if we do nothing but just change the fee rate? And so to do that, this chart is showing you cash flow. So we have to accumulate a certain amount of cash flow ahead of these projects so that we can pay them without going negative. And so that's what this is showing. And in order to not go negative, but pay for all the TMDL projects, you would need to increase from that $3.20 base rate up to $10.56 per month. Pretty steep jump with that one. The second option we wanted to look at was, what if we look at option 1, but we also modify the credit program? And when I say modify the credit program, we would suggest putting a cap on it at 50%, similar to what other localities are doing, and also implementing an annual renewal and inspection process. We feel like that would most likely take you from the 25% revenue change that you're at down to more like 5%, like the rest of the communities we see in Virginia. Just by doing that alone, that reduces you down to an annual increase up to $8.04 a month on that base rate. The next thing we wanted to look at was, what if we take those first 2 scenarios and instead of paying outright the full TMDL process, what if we look at financing? The state of Virginia has a revolving loan fund, which is low rate 20-year loans that you can do water quality projects with. And so this would allow us to not have the high peaks in the early years, but to stretch out the cost of TMDL over 20 years. So we looked at financing the $11.6 million over 20 years. With that and no other changes, for scenario 3, this doesn't include crediting. This is leaving the crediting as it is. You would look at increasing up to $7.66 per month for that baseline fee. And option 4 looks at doing the same thing, but again, folding in the credit adjustments, which would bring you down to an increase of $5.91 per month. And again, that's with financing the TMDL projects at about $11.6 million. So with that, our recommendations are, the first one is the crediting program. We feel like the crediting program you have currently actually increases your administrative costs because they have to do more enforcement actions as they go out, because they are responsible as part of this program to inspect the ponds. It's allowing for more credits to potentially BMPs that are ineffective. And so we recommend putting a cap on it to protect the administrative cost side of your program, but also to add the annual renewal that would include third-party inspections by the private side. Those third-party inspections and that would ensure that these BMPs are maintained year over year, so that when your staff under their permit goes out and inspects them, that there's less enforcement actions and less follow-up that they have to do. So it actually would reduce your administrative cost in that phase. The other thing we recommend to do, and this is to protect your general fund from having to make up these payments, is to increase your fee. Scenario 2 would reduce the credits plus increase the fee by paying everything outright and not using any financing. That would be $8.04 per month. Scenario 4 incorporates the financing and would increase it up to $5.91 per month. The other thing you can do is find an optimum level of increase that you would like to pursue. And with that, you would make up the delta either through the general fund or preferably through the revolving loan fund, so that you can keep all the costs related to your stormwater program and your stormwater fee. The last recommendation that I have is that you review this fee more regularly and tie that directly to your permit. Your permit renews every 5 years. Every time that permit renews, there's new requirements and there's new laws. And so that's a great time to stop, look at your fee, compare it to the new laws and the new things that you're going to need to do, and make sure that the two are going hand in hand and you can pay for one with the other. And finally, I've got this chart here that shows the various stormwater fees across the state. The vertical bar in red is your current fee here in Staunton. The other 4 bars are Waynesboro, Harrisonburg, Charlottesville, and Warrenton. They're some of the closer ones to your region. And the horizontal bars is where scenario 4 and scenario 2 would place you within the larger group. So yes, sir.
Scenario 6, what is that? It's down monthly rate 378. Am I missing something or what?
From the report, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what we were asked to do with that last scenario was to evaluate what if we didn't really do anything.
Yeah, okay.
And so basically scenario 6 in your report does not actually cover the cost. And so anything above and beyond your ability to pay with your current program would need to be covered by general fund or even through revolving loan fund, but then paying that through your general fund as well.
That would be what I asked back last year and just said, dude, what if we just tell the state to go take a hike?
Well, that would still be doing the projects. Yeah. Yes.
What was the last time Staunton raised the rate?
No.
Pete, was that 2010? I believe it was 2010. Yes.
So 13 years without a raise.
It went from like 280 to 320, if I remember correctly. It wasn't much. But
And you're recommending that we review it every 5 years whenever
Yes,
we
sir.
have to renew.
Yes, because every time this permit gets renewed, it's a large process in the state and it starts to encumber more and more things. And so each year this permit has added new requirements to you. So each 5 years, your program is going to grow in some fashion. And so you want to make sure that your fee can still sustain it. And particularly over this next cycle, if you do choose to increase it this time, you'll not only want to look at it next time for new changes in your program required by the new permit, but you also want to look at the impacts of finishing this permit cycle with this TMDL. Because once you are no longer required to the TMDL, there might be some savings there that you could make an adjustment with.
Approximately how many private stormwater management BMP facilities are there in the city?
Pete, do you know that?
I do not have that number off the top of my head.
Is the $7 million for the funding needs for restoration of those facilities, is that based on an assessment of any of them to date or just an approximation?
It's an approximation.
Yes, that is an approximation. The studies that we've done to date to find projects have mostly been focused on publicly owned lands, similar to the Gypsy Hill Park. There has been some, the Cole Avenue stream restorations on private land. But we do the next phase and study to find these projects is to look for those opportunities with the local BMPs, because we think that the best thing about those is they'll be lower cost because the infrastructure is already there. And it's a matter of uplifting that infrastructure that's not working.
And currently, there's no inspection program within the city for private BMPs.
So as part of your permit, Pete and his staff have to inspect each of the private entities once every 5 years.
Okay.
There is no requirement on many of those to self-inspect or to self-provide that. Most localities that have a fee, though, do require that as part of the crediting process, which that's where if you have a BMP right now that's ignored for 5 years and Pete's team finds it on that cycle and it's in disrepair, they have to write a letter. They have to tell them exactly what needs to do and create an enforcement chain. Once they send that letter, it has a certain time frame at which the owner has to fix it. Then they have to go back out and check it. Most of the time after that first one, it hasn't been fixed. Then they have to go through that again, but this time they have to step it up. And the state has to see that you as a locality are having a stepped enforcement program until it gets to the point where if it's not done, you do it yourself. So there's lots of cost and lots of administrative actions that have to happen. And that's where requiring those inspections is helpful to your program. Because one, we know the BMPs are in place and are functioning. And two, when it comes time for your staff to inspect them, they're more likely to be in good repair and not require that enforcement action.
And I can testify that in the days that I was running a retail place, which was a huge parking lot and a huge flat roof that ran off into a retention pond behind, my retention pond overgrew. And when I finally got it inspected, there was a significant charge that I had to incur in order to get it back up to code. And it's so smart to do it that way, because if you have routine inspections, you're going to get, the process is going to work.
Well, and it helps your property owners and the managers of the property, because they have to look at it annually and keep it up. Because a lot of the people, the business owner might not understand what that is. It was just part of the construction process.
Right.
But this helps to put a focus on that.
Right now, we're currently required to inspect 50
Can you get to the
systems.
microphone? Sorry.
We're required to inspect 50 sites per year right now. And with those inspections, when we send out the report, a majority, I would say, particularly the older structures and BMPs, do not have a maintenance agreement. So we send out a maintenance agreement and do our best for those owners to comply and get a maintenance agreement which states that they will maintain these systems. Is Willow here? Willow, do you have any idea how many, his question relative to how many private BMPs we do have in the city? Willow Hughes is our inspector and our environmental program specialist who does most of the groundwork for me out there.
I inspected about 50 last year and we have 80 due this year. And so every 5 years within that, we probably are over a couple hundred private.
Are most of them out of compliance?
Most of them have at least some issue that needs to be corrected. Yes.
I'm curious about the 6-tier reduction that we do. Was that ever a standard? Where did we get that? And how many properties benefit from that locally? Do you have any idea?
Well, I don't know how many properties benefit from it, but I know that when you were actually one of the first implementers of a stormwater utility fee, and especially outside of the coast, you were basically the first. And so I think part of that generation of it was, one, it was new to the state at the time. And two, you had to come up with something that was set for your stormwater program at the time. At the time, you did not have a permit. At the time, this Chesapeake Bay to TMDL didn't happen. So I think it made a lot of sense to make it very generous at that time, so that you were friendly to businesses, because that's who most often does it, but also made it a little easier to implement, given that you were the first implementers west of Richmond really to do that. Most of the others were all on the coast that were dealing with coastal flooding and that kind of thing, whereas you had much different reasons for doing it. Since then, your stormwater program has changed tremendously. The biggest reason for that is that new permit requirement. So.
So I just wanted to mention relative to the private sector BMPs out there. Our hope would be with this funding that when we do these inspections and give them notice of what the deficiencies are in their structures, and a lot of these structures are just for quantity, just for detention. And if we could upgrade them to include quality and help them defer those costs, I think it would go a long way. They would have incentive to maintain them, upgrade them. And then with the third-party inspections every year, they would know that they're being maintained. It costs a lot less to maintain them over time if they're keeping up with it annually.
When, Ms. Bogart, when will we need to have a motion and revisit this?
We will come back to this when we do the budget process for FY '25. So we wanted you to have this in front of you early to think about things as we're developing the final budget. This will come back before you in some way, shape, or form as part of that package of recommendations.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, and ladies,
Yeah,
for a
and
wonderful
lady.
presentation every time you come, Pete. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Oh, yeah. No,
But it needs to be addressed, and I thank you for all your time.